Some wars end in victory, others end in defeat. The Raven Guard are the product of a victory that failed. You might think that you know them, but they are perhaps the most misunderstood chapter of Space Marines in Imperial history. For 10,000 years, the Sons of the Raven have fought as loyal servants of the Imperium, striking from darkness, appearing without warning. But beneath their unquestioning loyalty lies a history shaped by betrayal, failure, and the slow death of an ideal. Across 1,000,000 worlds, they are remembered as hunters, assassins, masters of guerrilla warfare. However, history remembers them incorrectly. Stealth is not what defines them. It is loss. They are a first founding Space Marine chapter descended from Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, a primarch who rose from slavery to become a liberator, a ruler who believed that power existed to free the oppressed rather than to dominate them. During the Great Crusade, his legion carved a reputation for precision and discipline, bringing worlds into compliance through carefully planned strikes rather than wasteful slaughter. They fought as warriors, but they carried with them the ideals of men who remembered what it meant to live in chains. Then came betrayal. Upon the black sands of Istvaan V, the Raven Guard were all but destroyed. The Legion was shattered, their future stolen, and the hopes that had guided them through the Great Crusade were buried under the ashes of the Horus Heresy. Though they survived, survival came at a cost. The wounds inflicted that day would shape the Raven Guard for millennia to come, defining not only how they wage war, but how they see themselves and the Imperium they continue to serve. Beneath the black armor lies a chapter that remembers what it lost, a chapter that remembers what the Imperium was supposed to become. To understand the Raven Guard is to understand far more than shadow warfare. It is to understand duty without glory, loyalty without reward, and the burden of carrying ideals through a galaxy that no longer has any place for them. To understand the Raven Guard, we must first understand Corvus Corax himself, because long before he became a primarch, a warlord, or a master of a Space Marine Legion, Corax was something far more unusual within the history of the Imperium. He was a liberator. The Raven was not raised by kings, warriors, or conquerors. He was raised by slaves. Like all of the primarchs, Corax was stolen from the Emperor before he could reach maturity, cast across the galaxy by the Chaos Gods. His journey ended upon Lycius, a barren moon orbiting the Forge world of Kievar. It was a place of darkness, mines, and chains. Beneath its frozen surface, countless laborers toiled in brutal conditions, condemned to spend their lives extracting resources for masters they would never meet. Many of those imprisoned on Lycius were criminals, many more were not. Political dissidents, reformers, intellectuals, and workers who had simply failed to satisfy impossible quotas all found themselves cast into the mines alongside common convicts. To the rulers of Kievar, human lives were merely another resource to be consumed. The slaves discovered the infant Corvus deep beneath the surface, hidden within the darkness. Even as a child, there was something extraordinary about him. He grew with impossible speed, learned with astonishing ease, and possessed an instinctive understanding of the world around him. Those who raised Corax were not warriors seeking revenge, they were prisoners. They were thinkers, teachers, and idealists, men and women imprisoned precisely because they had challenged the system that ruled them. They taught him history, philosophy, justice, and most importantly, they taught him patience. Corax promised his adopted people that he would free them, but his mentors understood something that many revolutionaries do not. Rage and violence would not be enough. If their rebellion was to succeed, it would require planning, discipline, and restraint. So, Corax learned to watch, to move unseen, to study his enemies before striking. He learned that the most effective weapon is often the one an enemy never realizes exists until it is too late. The foundations of the Raven Guard were being laid long before the Legion itself ever met its primarch. As the years passed, Corax became a symbol of hope amongst the slaves of Lycius. They named him Deliverer, not because of what he had already achieved, but because of what they believed he would one day become. And eventually, that day arrived. The rebellion spread through the prison moon with unprecedented speed and precision that caught its rulers completely unprepared. Overseers who had ruled through fear found themselves haunted by an enemy that they could not predict. Their fortresses were infiltrated, their command structures dismantled, their control systematically deconstructed piece by piece. However, victory brought Corax face to face with a lesson that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The rulers of Kievar still possessed vast military and industrial resources upon the world below, and if they were allowed to continue the war, countless more would die. Corax understood that ending the conflict quickly would require a terrible choice. Using the resources under his control, he authorized devastating orbital attacks against the great manufactories of Kievar. Thousands died, perhaps more, but the guilds surrendered soon afterwards, and ultimately millions were freed. For many, it was a triumphant ending. A slave had become a liberator. Lycaeus was renamed Deliverance, and just like that, the prison moon had become a symbol of freedom. But Corax understood that freedom had not been won without sacrifice, had not arrived untouched by blood, and that power without justice was tyranny, but justice without strategy was powerless. When the Emperor finally came to Deliverance, he did not find a king ruling over a conquered world. He found a liberator. Corax had achieved what few rulers in the Age of Strife ever could. He had overthrown a brutal regime, united a fractured people, and begun building a society founded upon principles rather than fear. Father and son recognized much in one another. Both sought order amidst chaos. Both believed humanity could be united against a greater purpose. And when the Emperor revealed the truth of Corax's origins and offered him command of the 19th Legion, the Primarch accepted. Yet, even then, there was a subtle tension beneath that loyalty. Corax had fought tirelessly to free people from oppression. In stark contrast, the Emperor's Great Crusade demanded that entire worlds be brought into compliance, by bureaucracy or by bolter. Though he accepted his duty and served faithfully, this contradiction would never entirely leave him. Upon taking command of the 19th Legion, Corax transformed it in much the same way he had transformed Deliverance. The Legion's method became reflections of the lessons he had learned as a slave and later as a revolutionary: patience over recklessness. To his warriors, Corax was an imposing figure, though not in the manner of many of his brothers. His skin was white as alabaster, his hair black as a raven's feathers, and his eyes appeared as pools of living shadows. There was something unsettling about his presence, something difficult to describe even for those who fought beside him. In truth, Corax possessed a gift unlike any other. When he wished it, he could simply go unnoticed. Not invisibility, nor deception, but something stranger. The mind would slide away from him, eyes would fail to linger, attention would just drift elsewhere. Even standing in plain sight, Corax could become a shadow amongst shadows, a presence that existed beyond perception itself. Many would later see this as merely another weapon in the Primarch's arsenal, though in many ways it symbolized the man himself. Corax was never drawn to glory or spectacle. He sought results over recognition, freedom over power, and purpose over acclaim. Where some of his brothers demanded to be seen, the Raven, much like his Legion, was most effective when he remained unseen. While every Space Marine chapter inherits something of its Primarch, few bear the mark of their Gene Father as completely as the Raven Guard, but they also carry something else: a wound. Amongst the Adeptus Astartes, Gene Seed is far more than biological inheritance. It is legacy made flesh, the means by which a chapter preserves itself across millennia. Through it, each new generation inherits not only the physical traits of its Primarch, but also a small part of his nature. When Corax led the 19th Legion into the Dropsite massacre, he expected reinforcement. Instead, he found betrayal. As the Loyalist legions advanced, the second wave turned upon them, and within a matter of hours, the Raven Guard were brought to the brink of annihilation. Tens of thousands died amidst the black sands and volcanic ash. Veterans who had fought beside Corax since the earliest years of the Great Crusade were wiped out, and entire companies ceased to exist. When the survivors finally escaped the slaughter and returned to Deliverance, the Legion was little more than a shadow of its former self. As the remnants of the Legion struggled to recover, Corax searched desperately for a solution. Deep within ancient archives, he studied knowledge so heavily restricted that only a primarch could access it. Hidden within those forgotten records was genetic lore dating back to the earliest days of the Emperor's conquests on Terra, a method of accelerating the creation of new space marines and restoring the shattered strength of a legion. The risks were considerable, but for the first time since Istvaan, Corax saw hope. And astonishingly, it worked. Using genetic material derived from the Emperor's original Primarch project, Corax began creating a new generation of warriors. The first recruits emerged as stronger, faster, and more resilient than ordinary Astartes. Their transformation took days rather than years, and before long, hundreds of these new warriors, known as raptors, were fighting alongside the survivors of Istvaan. For a brief moment, it appeared that the Raven Guard might recover. Corax stood on the verge of expanding the project further. Thousands more warriors could soon have been created, enough perhaps to restore much of the Legion's lost strength. That was the moment that the Alpha Legion struck. Masters of infiltration and deception, agents of Alpharius penetrated the Raven Guard defenses on Deliverance itself. Disguised as loyal servants and hidden among the Legion's own personnel, they infiltrated the project, stealing priceless genetic data and corrupting the remaining gene seed with a virulent contaminant. The damage was not discovered until it was too late. Every generation implanted after the sabotage emerged horribly mutated. What should have been Space Marines became nightmares. Bodies grew too quickly and too violently, limbs stretched into grotesque proportions, bones warped, muscles swelled beyond all reason. Minds collapsed beneath the strain of the transformation. Warriors who should have stood amongst the finest of the Emperor's sons instead developed into feral monsters trapped within their own ruined flesh. The tragedy was made all the more unbearable because Corax had already seen success. He knew exactly what had been stolen from him. The first Raptors fought with distinction throughout the remainder of the heresy, living proof that the project could have succeeded, but the future they represented was gone. By the time Corax uncovered the infiltration and exposed the Alpha Legion operatives responsible, the damage was irreversible. The dream of rebuilding the Raven Guard had been destroyed, and in its place remained only a handful of successful Raptors, countless twisted failures, and yet another wound inflicted upon a Legion that had already lost almost everything. Unlike their unfortunate feral younger brothers, the original successful Raptors were not slain by their Primarch. However, they would not survive the war. Before discovery of the Alpha Legion's tampering, Corax believed his own genetic experimentation was flawed. As a result, he refused to harvest any Raptor gene seed to make more, fearing the corruption was random and hereditary. By the end of the heresy, of the initial successful 500 stable Raptors, none remained. All had fallen in battle. In time, the worst of these tragedies passed into history, but the damage had been inflicted so deeply that not even 10,000 years would permit the Raven Guard to heal. Their genetic legacy would never fully recover, and much of their original gene stock was lost forever. Over the millennia, further degradation has continued to take its toll. Even today, the process of creating a Raven Guard Space Marine remains unusually difficult. Many aspirants perish before completing their transformation. Several of the organs possessed by other chapters no longer function correctly within the Sons of Corax, while others fail to develop altogether. Perhaps the most visible mark of their inheritance is one shared by nearly every battle brother of the chapter. As the gene seed takes hold, skin gradually loses all pigment, becoming pale as ivory. Hair darkens to jet black, eyes grow increasingly swallowed, and over time, they begin to resemble the Primarch himself, not merely in appearance, but also in temperament. Like Corax, the Raven Guard are reserved and introspective warriors. They favor observation over impulse, patience over spectacle. They are often quiet, even amongst their fellow Astartes, speaking only when necessary and rarely seeking attention. To many chapters, this restraint appears distant, even cold. And then there is the Primarch's curse. As it takes hold, a battle brother becomes increasingly withdrawn. He isolates himself from his comrades. He grows suspicious of direct assaults and contemptuous of wasteful displays of force. His careful patience slowly hardens into stubborn certainty. Eventually, some become convinced that only their own methods can bring victory, that only they truly understand the correct path, that everyone else is wrong. It is a subtle affliction, but a dangerous one. In many ways, it mirrors the final years of Corax himself, the burden of failure, the weight of regret, the slow retreat into shadow. Even 10,000 years later, the Sons of the Raven continue to carry both the strengths and sorrows of their Genefather. His appearance lives on in their features, his methods endure in their warfare, and his scars remain etched into their very blood. Following the Horus heresy, the burden of Istvaan never truly eased for Corax. The destruction of his legion, the horrors born from his attempts to rebuild it, and the countless lives lost beneath his command weighed heavily upon his shoulders. Though he remained loyal to the Emperor until the end, Corax emerged from the heresy a very different man than the liberator who had once overthrown the Masters of Deliverance. After dividing his legion in accordance with the Codex Astartes, Corax eventually departed the Imperium altogether. Leaving only the words, "Nevermore," behind him, the Raven Lord vanished into the Eye of Terror in search of those responsible for humanity's greatest betrayal. Rumor has it that there, amidst the madness of the warp, something changed. The strange abilities he had possessed since childhood grew into something far greater. The Primarch, who had once slipped unnoticed through shadows, became a being seemingly made of shadow itself, capable of dissolving into darkness and taking the form of a vast flock of ravens. Despite his terrifying transformation, let it be clear that Corax remained no servant of chaos. If anything, he became something closer to vengeance given form. Across the millennia, rumors and scattered accounts have spoken of a dark presence stalking the Eye of Terror, a hunter moving through the realms of chaos itself, a relentless shadow pursuing a single unfortunate quarry. Lorgar, architect of the heresy and the brother Corax blames for so much of what was lost. Legends tell of the Raven Lord descending upon the worlds of word-bearers like a creature from nightmare, slaughtering traitors by the score before confronting Lorgar himself. Though both Primarchs had changed beyond recognition, their old conflict remained. Lorgar ultimately escaped, and when the battle was done, Corax swore that even if it took millennia, he would see his hunt through to a single, absolute conclusion. Whether or not he still pursues that oath in the current age of the Imperium, none can say for certain, but for the Sons of the Raven, the symbolism is difficult to ignore. Their Primarch began his life hunting tyrants in the darkness of a prison moon, and 10,000 years later, he still hunts. Let us look now at the Sons of the Primarch themselves. Before Corax ever set foot upon Deliverance, the 19th Legion already possessed a reputation unlike any of their brothers. During the Unification Wars on Terra, the future Raven Guard were rarely employed as line breakers or siege specialists. They fought a different kind of highly effective war. While other armies smashed through enemy fortresses and shattered battle lines, the warriors of the 19th Legion slipped through the gaps in the front, infiltrated strongholds, sabotaged infrastructure, and eliminated commanders whose deaths would bring entire campaigns crashing down around them. Even in those early years, the Legion demonstrated a preference for precision over spectacle. Victory mattered, glory did not, and they were very good at achieving victory. Destruction of an enemy army was desirable, destruction of its leadership was often enough. Long before Corax arrived, the Legion had already become specialists in the unseen aspects of warfare, accomplishing in darkness what other forces required open battle to achieve. These talents made them invaluable during the Great Crusade. Among the Emperor's sons, none made greater use of the 19th Legion than Horus. Before his treachery, Horus Lupercal recognized the Raven Guard as one of the most effective military instruments at his disposal. While his Lunar Wolves excelled at decisive assaults and aggressive offenses, the 19th Legion often operated as the blade that slits the enemy's throat while they are distracted by the spear. Together, The two legions developed a close working relationship. When Horus sought victory, the warriors of the 19th often created the conditions that made victory possible. The partnership was so successful that many campaigns saw the Raven Guard functioning almost as an extension of the Lunar Wolves themselves, eliminating key enemy command structures, gathering intelligence, and preparing the battlefield before the main assault would begin. There was perhaps no greater testament to the trust that existed between the two legions than the Istvaan system itself. Long before it became synonymous with betrayal, it had once been brought into Imperial compliance by the Raven Guard. Years later, the same system would become the site of their near-total destruction, one of the many cruel ironies the Legion would go on to suffer. When Corax eventually took command of the 19th, he did not replace its existing character, he refined it. The methods he had learned as a revolutionary on Deliverance aligned naturally with the Legion's established strengths. Their preference for infiltration became doctrine, their patience became philosophy, their precision became identity. Under Corax, the Raven Guard evolved into one of the most effective legions of the Great Crusade, achieving victories that often appeared effortless to outside observers. Amongst the Legion's most feared specialists were the Mon Dathan, elite shadow killers whose mastery of stealth became legendary even amongst their fellow Raven Guard. Drawn from the most gifted warriors of the 19th Legion, they embodied the absolute pinnacle of Corax's philosophy, eliminating enemy leaders and command structures with such precision that entire campaigns could be decided before the wider battle had even begun. The Raven Guard did not win because they fought harder than their enemies. They won because they understood them better. They studied before they struck, they observed before they acted, and when the moment finally came, the battle was often decided before the enemy even realized a war had begun. When the Emperor needed to bring a world into compliance that required a subtle stroke of the brush and a delicate hand, he would not send the World Eaters or the Space Wolves. He would send the gracefully cunning Raven Guard. It has now been 10,000 years since the fires of the Horus Heresy, yet the Raven Guard still wage war beneath its shadow. Their numbers have never fully recovered from the devastation of Istvaan. Their gene seed remains among the most fragile of the first founding chapters, and every battle brother lost represents an investment of years, decades, or even centuries that cannot be easily replaced. While other chapters may be willing to spend lives in the pursuit of victory, the Raven Guard live by a simple philosophy. A warrior cannot be wasted if he is never placed in a position where waste becomes necessity. For the Sons of Corax, warfare is not a contest of strength, it is a problem to be solved. The Raven Guard have little interest in glorious charges, historic last stands, or battles fought for the sake of honor. Such things make for inspiring legends, but legends do not win wars, results do. As a consequence, the chapter specializes in forms of warfare that many of their cousins consider unconventional. They strike from unexpected directions, exploit weaknesses, and attack where the enemy is least prepared to defend itself. Rather than grinding down an opponent through prolonged campaigns of attrition, they seek to identify a critical point upon which an entire conflict rests, and then they destroy it. A planetary governor, a command bunker, a communications relay, a supply depot, a single bridge connecting two armies. To the Raven Guard, the destruction of one vital target is often worth more than the annihilation of 10,000 enemy soldiers. This philosophy can sometimes make them appear callous to outsiders. They are not. A Raven Guard assault is often preceded by weeks or even months of reconnaissance. Scouts and vanguard forces infiltrate hostile territory, gathering intelligence, observing troop movements, and identifying vulnerabilities long before the enemy becomes aware of their presence. By the time the chapter commits its main force, the battle has frequently been decided already, and when attack finally does come, it arrives with startling speed. Assault Marines and Vanguard veterans plunge from the sky on roaring jetpacks, screaming chainswords and crackling lightning claws, spreading sudden and relentless death through scores of enemy infantry. In Inceptors plummet from above with overwhelming force, dreadnoughts crash into battle from drop pods, while battle-line squads hop from Thunderhawk gunships directly onto critical objectives. The enemy finds itself attacked simultaneously from multiple directions, its command structure already in ruins, unable to effectively respond. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they are gone. The objective secured, the target eliminated, the war altered forever. This preference for mobility and precision also shapes the chapter's equipment. Unlike many Space Marine chapters, the Raven Guard maintain relatively few heavily armored vehicles. Massive spearheads of land raiders and battle tanks do not suit their preferred style of warfare. Instead, they favor aircraft, rapid insertion craft, reconnaissance elements, and highly mobile infantry formations capable of operating independently for extended periods. Perhaps nowhere is this philosophy more apparent than in the chapter's extensive use of vanguard formations. Entire strike forces equipped with Phobos pattern armor may be deployed deep behind enemy lines, operating a shadow war within larger conflicts. These warriors are expected to survive without support while gathering intelligence, sabotaging infrastructure, and eliminating high-value targets before vanishing once more into the darkness. To many observers, such methods appear surgical, and that is precisely the point. The Raven Guard do not seek a fair fight, they seek victory. This same philosophy extends beyond individual battles and shapes the very structure of the chapter itself. In theory, the Raven Guard are organized much like any other Codex-compliant Space Marine chapter of the 41st millennium. In practice, they are anything but typical. Following the Horus Heresy, Corax embraced the reforms that would eventually become the Codex Astartes. The vast legions of old were broken apart into smaller chapters, reducing the risk that any one commander could ever again wield enough power to threaten the Imperium. Like many of the loyalist primarchs, Corax accepted the necessity of these changes, and the Raven Guard were reorganized accordingly. On parchment, the chapter consists of 10 companies, each intended to contain 100 battle brothers led by a shadow captain. This structure provides a clear chain of command, established responsibilities, and a framework capable of supporting military operations across an entire galaxy. Reality, however, is rarely so neat as parchment. The Raven Guard have spent 10,000 years battling the consequences of Istvaan. Their recruitment remains slow, gene seed difficult to maintain, and losses almost impossible to replace. As a result, the chapter rarely achieves its theoretical strength. Where some chapters place immense emphasis upon hierarchy and central command, the Raven Guard place trust elsewhere. They place it in individual judgment. The senior officers of the chapter bear the title of Shadow Captain, while the chapter master carries the rank Master of Shadows, a tradition said to originate with Corax himself. Yet, despite these ranks, Raven Guard commanders are granted an unusual degree of autonomy. Individual companies routinely operate on opposite sides of the galaxy for years at a time. Shadow captains answer requests for aid, pursue developing threats, and launch campaigns with a freedom that would make many Imperial commanders deeply uncomfortable. In some cases, company may commit itself to an operation without first seeking the approval of the Master of Shadows at all. To outside observers, this can appear dangerously disorganized, but to the Raven Guard, it is simply practical. A chapter built upon reconnaissance, infiltration, and rapid response cannot afford to wait for orders traveling across interstellar distances. Their success often critically hinges upon a commander's personal ability to assess a situation and react immediately. The Raven Guard therefore place extraordinary trust in their officers, expecting them to pursue the chapter's goals without constant supervision. It is a remarkable level of independence for an organization within the Imperium, but it also reflects the core values inherited from Corax. The Primarch who once overthrew tyrants upon Deliverance was never a man who believed wisdom flowed only from the top of a hierarchy. He believed that competence matters more than status. The devastation of the heresy also left the Legion struggling to replace vast quantities of war gear, forcing many formations to continue operating with older marks of power armor and equipment long after other legions have modernized. Over the millennia, this necessity evolved into tradition. the Raven Guard maintain an unusually large number of ancient armor patterns compared to many chapters. Especially synonymous with the chapter is the Mark VI Corvus pattern beaky helmet, the distinctive pointed nose cone of which was specifically designed to hold additional advanced communications equipment and sensors. To wear such armor is considered both an honor and a responsibility, a reminder that the Raven Guard remain custodians of a legacy forged in triumph, tested by betrayal, and preserved through sacrifice. For the Sons of the Raven, organization has never been about rigid control. It is about creating the freedom to act when the moment arrives. Because in the end, the Raven Guard have always believed that wars are not won by the loudest commanders, the largest armies, or the most glorious charges. They are won by disciplined warriors, making the right decision at precisely the right moment. The culture of the Raven Guard is perhaps even more unusual than their methods of waging war. The Raven Guard maintain numerous traditions, many of which revolve around remembrance rather than triumph. One of the most significant is the carrying of corvia, small avian skulls worn as fetishes and symbols of honor. The tradition begins long before a warrior earns his black armor. During their arduous training, prospective neophytes must undertake a solitary rite of passage. Armed with little more than their training and patience, they enter the forests of Kiovar in search of the tiny raven-like birds native to the world. The task sounds deceptively simple. It is anything but. The birds are elusive, alert, and exceptionally difficult to approach. To capture one requires complete mastery of the stealth techniques the chapter calls wraith slipping. Neophytes may spend months learning to move silently through the wilderness before they finally succeed in approaching close enough to seize a bird with their bare hands. From the skull of this creature, the neophyte fashions a corvia. Thereafter, it accompanies him throughout his life. Unlike medals or honors awarded by commanders, a corvia is deeply personal. It serves as a reminder of discipline earned rather than status granted. Over centuries of warfare, these small tokens become treasured symbols of a warrior's service, carried into every battle and every campaign. Even in death, the tradition continues. When a Raven Guard battle brother falls, his comrades recover both his gene seed and his corvia. Another warrior will carry the token until it can be returned to Kiovar, where it is buried in the soil of the chapter's homeworld. In this way, no son of Corax truly makes the final journey alone. It is a surprisingly intimate custom for warriors often viewed as cold and distant. The Raven Guard do not worship the Emperor with the fervent devotion seen amongst other chapters, such as the Black Templars. To them, the Emperor is not a god, but a ruler, the architect of humanity's great empire and the master whom they are sworn to serve. Likewise, they do not revere Corax as a flawless figure beyond criticism. They remember him as he truly was, a brilliant leader, a liberator, a warrior capable of extraordinary compassion and extraordinary ruthlessness, but also as a primarch who made mistakes and carried the consequences of those mistakes for the remainder of his life. Perhaps because of this, the Raven Guard possess a degree of self-awareness rarely found within the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. They study their failures as carefully as their victories. Following every campaign, commanders review intelligence, battle records, and tactical outcomes in exhaustive detail. Success is celebrated briefly, and mistakes are remembered far longer. Every battle is viewed as a lesson to be learned rather than a triumph to be admired. Yet perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the Raven Guard is their attitude towards humanity itself. When discussions arise concerning the most compassionate chapters of Space Marines, the Salamanders are almost always mentioned first. The Sons of Vulcan have earned that reputation through countless examples of personal sacrifice and their unusually close relationship with the ordinary people they protect. The Raven Guard are rarely included in the same conversation, but in many ways, they should be. Their compassion simply manifests itself differently. Corax was raised amongst prisoners, laborers, and political dissidents, not kings, generals, or warriors. He learned his earliest lessons from people who had spent their lives living beneath the boots of tyrants, and unlike many of his brothers, he never forgot what it felt like and what it meant to be powerless. That perspective echoes throughout the chapter to this day. The Raven Guard generally view civilian casualties not as an unfortunate necessity of war, but as evidence that a plan has failed. Their entire doctrine is built around precision, infiltration, and decapitation strikes specifically because such methods achieve victory while avoiding the needless destruction that accompanies large-scale warfare. Corax himself frequently favoured operations that minimised loss of life, both amongst his own legion and among the populations caught between opposing forces. The key difference is that the Raven Guard rarely advertise this concern. They are not humanitarians in the way that the Salamanders are. They do not linger amongst those they serve. They do not seek gratitude, admiration, or recognition. If the Salamanders are the visible shield standing between humanity and extinction, then the Raven Guard are the knife that quietly removes that threat before a shield is ever required. It is an important distinction, but an important similarity as well. Beneath the black armor, the Sons of Corax still carry something of the slave who became a liberator. For all their cold professionalism, the Raven Guard remain one of the few chapters that consistently remembers what the Imperium is supposed to protect. Not worlds, not territory, not resources, not glory. People. For all their mastery of stealth and deception, the Raven Guard have never hidden from their own history. Their homeworld is Deliverance, the same barren moon upon which Corax was raised. Orbiting the heavily industrialized world of Kiovar, Deliverance remains an airless rock of mines, manufactories, and fortress complexes. Massive cargo vessels move constantly between the moon and the world below, feeding an industrial machine capable of producing weapons and war material on a scale rivaled by few Space Marine homeworlds. The most important structure on Deliverance is still the one built by its former oppressors, the Raven Spire. Before Corax's rebellion, the immense Black Tower served as the headquarters of the prison guards who ruled Lycius through fear and brutality. After liberation, it became the fortress monastery of the Raven Guard, and it remains their home to this day. What makes the Raven Spire unusual is that Corax deliberately refused to restore it completely. The scars of the old regime were left visible. Damage from the rebellion was preserved rather than repaired. Cracks, wounds, and imperfections were maintained as a permanent reminder of those who had suffered beneath the tower's shadow. Where many chapters build monuments celebrating their victories, the Raven Guard choose to preserve a monument to their past. Even today, recruits learn the arts of stealth within the labyrinthian halls of the Raven Spire, practicing the techniques of wraith-slipping in darkness before ever setting foot upon a battlefield. Veterans return carrying the corvia of their fallen brothers. Shadow captains gather to study campaigns both successful and disastrous. Every corridor echoes with lessons from the past, and high above it all sits perhaps the most haunting chamber in the entire fortress, the Eyrie, the private quarters once occupied by Corax himself. Few Raven Guard ever enter it. Fewer still will speak of it. To many within the chapter, it serves as a silent reminder that their father may be gone, but his shadow has never truly departed Deliverance. The Raven Guard has produced no shortage of legendary warriors since their inception, though perhaps more than most chapters, its greatest heroes reveal the different ways in which Corax's legacy can be interpreted. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the relationship between the chapter's two most prominent living figures. The current Master of Shadows is Istvaan V. Before his ascension to commanding the chapter, Shan served in the 10th, 8th, 4th, and 1st Companies, building a reputation as one of the most patient and methodical commanders in the chapter's history. Where others see battlefields, Shan sees opportunities. His campaigns are built upon intelligence, deception, infiltration, and psychological warfare. Entire wars have been won before the enemy even realized he was present. His most famous victory came during the defense of Kauth, where he led a daring infiltration of the Black Basilica, a colossal chaos fortress whose destruction proved pivotal in breaking the enemy invasion. It was exactly the sort of victory the Raven Guard admire most: precise, effective, decisive. If Corax represented the patient strategist and calculating revolutionary, then many within the chapter view Shan as perhaps his purest modern successor. Ironically, the man responsible for placing Shan upon the throne is the chapter's other great living hero. Kayvan Shrike. For many years, Shrike served as chapter master and became one of the most celebrated Raven Guard commanders of the modern age. Wielding the legendary Raven's talons, a pair of lightning claws said to have been forged by Corax himself, Shrike earned a reputation for victories that bordered on the impossible. Unlike Shan, however, Shrike often preferred to lead from the front. He embodied the aggressive edge of Raven Guard doctrine, striking suddenly and violently before vanishing once more into the darkness. Entire worlds threatened by War Skullcrack came to regard him as a savior, while Imperial commanders concentrated on strategically valuable assets. Shrike repeatedly diverted his forces to defend isolated populations that had effectively been abandoned. To countless guardsmen and civilians, the arrival of the Raven Guard's third company became a symbol of hope. Arguably, his most remarkable act, however, was stepping down. Believing himself too impulsive and aggressive to fully embody Corax's teachings, Shrike voluntarily relinquished command of the chapter to Shan and returned to the field. In an Imperium where power is rarely surrendered willingly, such a decision is almost unheard of. Today, while Shan commands the chapter, Shrike once again fights in the shadows at the heart of the Third Company, waging covert wars across the galaxy. Among the chapter's spiritual leaders, few are as striking as Chaplain Corday. Clad in armor covered with the preserved bones of giant predators he's personally hunted on Kievar, the skull of a great beast forms his helm, while its skeletal remains adorn almost every surface on his armor. Many believe it is among the most intimidating appearances possessed by any chaplain in the Imperium. Then there is Shadow Captain Aramis Corian of the Fourth Company. While many Raven Guard maintain a degree of distance from their allies, Corian became known for forging unusually strong bonds with other chapters. His campaigns alongside the Brazen Minotaurs earned him a reputation as both a master infiltrator and a commander willing to honor debts of loyalty long after others had forgotten them. Finally, there is Captain Kyron Solak of the Fifth Company. Where Shan represents patience and Shrike represents precision aggression, Solak represents relentless pursuit. A veteran of countless campaigns, he is renowned throughout the chapter for bold and daring operations that push Raven Guard doctrine to its absolute limits. To many enemies of the Imperium, Solak is less a commander than a rumor, a shadow that appears without warning and leaves only the corpse behind. Together, these warriors reveal something important about the Raven Guard. There is no single way to follow Corax's example. Some inherit his patience, some inherit his compassion, some inherit his ruthlessness, but all inherit his shadow. At the end of the 41st millennium, the opening of the Great Rift changed the galaxy forever. Across the Imperium, entire sectors vanished behind violent warp storms. Ancient supply routes collapsed overnight. Worlds that had stood secure for millennia suddenly found themselves isolated, besieged, or abandoned altogether. For many chapters, the Era Indomitus represented a crisis unlike anything since the Horus Heresy. For the Raven Guard, it represented something else, an opportunity. The Sons of Corax have always excelled in fractured wars fought across great distances. They are their most dangerous when battle lines collapse, communications fail, and when enemies believe themselves secure behind occupied territory. In a galaxy now split in half by the Great Rift, there are few chapters better suited to the realities of modern warfare. The arrival of the Primaris Marines only accelerated this transformation. Unlike some first founding chapters who viewed Guilliman's reinforcements with suspicion or outright hostility, the Raven Guard embraced them almost immediately. Their reasons were as practical as they were obvious. For 10,000 years, the chapter has fought a constant battle against dwindling numbers and deteriorating gene seed. Every campaign risked losses that could not be easily replaced. The arrival of thousands of fresh Primaris warriors and vast reserves of stable genetic material was not only welcome, it may have saved the chapter from eventual extinction. Just as importantly, the new war gear introduced alongside Primaris Marines seemed perfectly suited to Raven Guard doctrine. Phobos pattern armor, Vanguard formations, Eliminators, Infiltrators, Inceptors, and Reavers all greatly complemented tactics the chapter has been perfecting since before the Imperium itself had fully conquered Terra. While many chapters had to adapt to this new technology, the Raven Guard simply wondered why no one had built it sooner. Today, Raven Guard companies and strike forces operate across enormous regions of the Imperium, particularly throughout Segmentum Pacificus and Segmentum Tempestus. Small, autonomous formations wage hidden wars against Orc empires, Chaos warbands, Tyranid splinter fleets, and expanding Xenos powers. Entire campaigns are fought without most Imperial citizens even realizing the Astartes were present at all. A governor survives an assassination attempt because the killer vanished right before reaching his chambers. An enemy crusade collapses because its supply depots inexplicably explode. A war loses momentum after several key warlords vanish overnight. Again and again, the fingerprints of the Raven Guard can be found on victories for which others often receive the credit. It suits them perfectly. In a galaxy increasingly consumed by darkness, there are few warriors better equipped to operate within it. The Raven Guard are fiercely loyal servants of the Imperium, but they have never been entirely comfortable with what the Imperium has become. Descended from a primarch who overthrew tyrants and liberated slaves, the chapter often finds itself fighting for an empire whose methods stand in direct contrast with many of their ideals. This tension rarely manifests as open defiance. The Raven Guard obey their duty without question. They judge success not by territory conquered or enemies slain, but by how effectively a threat can be removed and how many innocent lives can be spared in the process. Their relationships with other Imperial organizations reflects this pragmatic outlook. The Salamanders are among the chapter's closest allies. Both trace part of their identity to the shared trauma of Istvaan V, and both retain a rare concern for the ordinary citizens of the Imperium. Though they express that compassion differently, mutual respect runs deep between them. The White Scars have long maintained a far more complicated relationship with the Raven Guard. While the two chapters have fought together successfully on many occasions, centuries of grudges, failed operations, and conflicting interpretations of battlefield responsibility have fostered a lingering rivalry that neither side has fully forgotten. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains an uneasy relationship with the chapter. Deliverance and Kievar possess extensive industrial capabilities that remain under Raven Guard control, rather than outright Mechanicus oversight, a situation that many within the priesthood of Mars view with considerable frustration. The Inquisition is equally wary. The Raven Guard's secretive nature, unusual genetic issues, and tendency to operate independently often attract unwanted scrutiny. In return, the Sons of Corax have little interest in outsiders examining their affairs too closely. Beyond the Imperium, however, there are two enemies for whom the Raven Guard reserve particular hatred. The Alpha Legion remains their oldest and most personal foe. The sabotage of Corax's attempts to rebuild his shattered legion created a wound that has never healed, and 10,000 years later, the two forces still wage an endless war of infiltration, counterintelligence, and deception. And then, there are the Night Lords, who represent a different kind of rivalry altogether. Both chapters strike from the darkness, but for entirely opposite reasons. Whereas the Night Lords use fear to dominate and enslave, the Raven Guard use stealth to dismantle tyrants and liberate those beneath them. In many ways, they are distorted reflections of one another. In the end, the Raven Guard endure as one of the Imperium's most underappreciated yet paradoxical assets, a chapter forged in catastrophe, shaped by loss, and sustained by relentless commitment to precision over glory. From the prison moon uprising of their primarch to the ashes of Istvaan V, and into the long shadow of the 41st millennium, they have refined war into something silent, surgical, and absolute. They do not seek legends, and they do not build them. Instead, they erase threats before histories can even record their rise. Beneath the black armor and the doctrines of shadow warfare remains the same core identity inherited from their primarch, a belief that power exists to end oppression, not to perpetuate it. 10,000 years on, the Sons of Corax still fight as hunters in the dark, carrying forward a legacy defined not by what was gained, but by what was lost, and by the unbroken resolve to ensure that in the end, the right thing is done, quietly, effectively, and without witness.